I think, okay, so just kind of in light of this, so how do you feel, let's kind of, we'll start yours a little bit differently, but let's talk about memory to capture feelings of loss and artifacts. And how do you what do you kind of think about that in your own practice?
I love that you use the word artifacts. So as humans, I think we're all attached to objects because every object has a meaning. And then there's special objects that, mean something to you specifically. I guess I would say that memory for me is, so we were just talking about my grandmother. I unfortunately, when I think about her now, think about the hospital bed and seeing her that way. I have to force myself to think about the wonderful things about her that I truly want to hold on to and remember. So memory to me is sort of, it's finalized and definite, but at the same time it's fleeting. Like it's always changing and it's always moving and disappearing and coming back, and I think that's something really interesting. I think along with loss in my work comes this like constant trying to hold something down, trying to cover it, trying to protect it, trying to make sure that it doesn't ever leave me, and then the objects come into play with where seeing them helps me specifically remember something about that person or gives me a feeling that then triggers an emotion. Yeah.
No, definitely. Thinking about how we want to direct this, because I think we could talk about just that, but let's maybe talk about the feeling of pinning something down or collecting or objects that refer to help us remember or help us. And there's also an element of gaining knowledge and how a library, that's a whole different type of memory.
Right.
But do you see any connections about the type of memory that you are engaged with, like pulling objects, the very fleeting, it's abstract, it's subjective, and then there's a library, which is a collection, which is like, it memorializes, it canonizes, it's what's in that collection is, it's there, it's a public collection for people to access. So I'm trying to think of how I can make that a good question for you. Do you kind of get where I'm throwing that ball a little bit?
Yeah, I think I use the library as, that library specifically, sometimes I like to go in there and just pull a book off the shelf and see if that evokes anything in me, and then it just starts unraveling almost, where, oh my goodness, this artist, I've never seen this work before, and it's so strange. A lot of the times I'll hit something right on the head, I'll pull something off the shelf and it's like, okay, this was for me. And I don't mean specifically for me, but it's like this moment was for me. Am I getting that where
No, okay, that's hitting a good point. I think your work deals a lot with like communication, sometimes really literally with telephones, and you're talking about specific moments, and that's a lot about what this show is it's specific times that are connecting specific moments, like specific points in space. And so maybe, do you want to talk about some times where you were in the library and you were just searching and you found things, you weren't necessarily looking in a way based on like the catalog that's provided for you,
I never use the catalog. Direct me if I'm going in a weird direction, but my husband is also an artist, and he is not affiliated with the school, so he cannot check books out from that library. What we've been doing is monthly, multiple times in a month, we'll go together, and it's like we call it a library day. It's kind of super cute. But yeah, we'll go in our separate directions. He knows got that place mapped out. You know, he knows where he wants to go, and I've learned through him where the gold is, you know. So I sort of follow him around, but then we separate, and I start just pulling books off the shelf and finding. I had a meeting with one of the professors, and they were talking about a specific artist that I should look at, and I had forgotten about it. I didn't write it down, but I was through just pulling books off the shelf, I found this artist again, and it was like, okay, I really should have written that down, and this is on point. Thomas Hirschhorn was the artist. I don't know, the other day I pulled out a book. I didn't even look at the title, but inside was a list of dead artists and when they were born and when they died and where they were born and where they died. And it was just this lexicon of, I mean, the book went on and on and on, and I didn't even recognize many of the names. I just thought it was interesting to have that documented that way.
And so the way that we document or we archive or we put things in records, it can really shape the way that it's remembered by future generations. So how do you feel that do you think about that? I think that might be, as a visual person, that is probably huge, like the way, or well, just let you kind of answer.
The way things are mapped out in the library, like they're
kind of getting away from the library, but just like what you said about how things like it was okay. So one way to think about people's death is to literally put it as like this person lived and they died, and this is where they're buried. There's many other ways to capture that. So do you feel like in your practice that you're interested in ways of capturing records and memories that isn't necessarily textual, or because we're used to records in text as a society, and so I think that's why it's interesting. That's why it's really interesting to consult artists, because they usually, if they're using text, they're probably not using it in the way we're used to, and they might not be using text at all. So do you think about the archival, and we talked about artifacts, but do you talk about the idea of your work as a record of something, and do you think you're capturing it in a way that's maybe richer than just a textual like document? Like there's your grandmother's death certificate, and then there's you know all of your work that you're making now. So do you have you thought about that before, about the way art can be an archive?
Well, I think most definitely I have thought about it, but it's not often. I guess it's not really the way that I think or approach things, but I love this conversation. I think I was using the words like fleeting and trying to capture something, and I think text seems so there, you know, it'll be repeated, it can be printed, it can stay in the same place. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I think my work, I do use text occasionally. I don't know. It's just a different way of archiving something. I mean, the material that I use is not archival by any means. I think it's not necessarily ephemeral, but you know, it's not going to be here forever. And I like that idea that it won't be here forever. But a book, a text, something written down seems so finalized. And you just mentioned the death certificate. That's final, you know, and we do in this society react to things that seem so like a certificate that seems very real.
Or an ID, and it even goes back to your husband doesn't have a student ID. He can't check out books.
So I have to go with him and check out his books for him. Yeah.
And so that's a little bit of a tangent. I just think that your work seems to. I'm trying to think about how, I guess let's talk about space a little bit, and let's talk about your memories inside the fine arts library.
Okay.
And like interacting with that space and like kind of your emotions or sensations or just memories, narratives of it.
I really like how it seems underground in a way. I mean, you enter this beautiful building and then you go down this long hallway and then you enter in. There's a lot of light coming in still from the windows. It just seems like a really comfortable space for me after going there several times. I don't know. I never really use the catalogs. I tend to be a little lazy and go and talk to the people at the desk and can you help me? And they're always very helpful. Usually, if Dane and I go, he'll be looking at books and I'll be on the complete opposite side, like curled up in a little chair, going through the book that I want to check out. Sometimes if we stay there long enough, I won't even check the book out because I feel like I've gotten the information that I need. Yeah.
So you really like, I think there's some connections about, because I'm thinking about your phone book piece, which was like you're inviting people into a space and you're inviting them to observe, to stay, to, it's not, I didn't feel like I was rushed. Like I felt like it was really about a pause. And so do you feel like, that space, when you use space, and I haven't seen your work in as far as like installation style, but how does space play into your practice? Just
That's a great question. The phone booth piece is the first thing that I've ever done where I've made a structure that someone could enter. But I think space, specifically with my work, I'm always trying to contain something, so there's always a space that's being interacted with an object or with a material, something like that. I think of containers, and then I think of my work specifically, body as container. We are containers, and then there's the space around the work, and I think that where I'm at in this stage of the game, I realize that everything around my piece or my work informs that work. So being aware of where I'm placing these objects and what the things around it are saying about it, or are they completely opposite things? Does this thing that I just placed in this space, is it odd? Is it the odd man out, or does it work with where it's at?
And I think that's really important. I think that's what I think when I criticize work, I think that's the first thing I think about is, did the artist think about how they were going to change the perception of space? Did they think about, and what you said about objects informing each other, and that goes into a big thing about shifting, how libraries are shifting right now, because if you think of a book as like a package of information, the internet really undermines that, because the internet is not necessarily about packets. It's about linked things, and so things don't have to be necessarily. They don't all have to be under a broad umbrella anymore. Right. They can be a series of lots of things being interconnected just by the ability to in the code or being able to place a hyperlink. So do you think, I know that we are in the information age. Do you feel like the just vast amount of information and vast amount of ability to connect things that might not necessarily have been they're really, like, literally, and it's kind of hard for me to explain this quickly, but there was a time where it was very hard to connect things that weren't there just wasn't. Nobody had thought about connecting them that way because it was so hard to. Because it's like, how do you connect a book about 15th century China and a contemporary female artist from the 70s? How do you connect them? And now with the internet and the ability to, you really needed to have a scholar, somebody needed to be interested in that. But now you can literally have a Tumblr and link them together. But it also produces a lot. And so I'm just wondering, when you talk about things informing each other, this is if you don't have an answer to this, it's okay. But we are in an age where people are producing massive amounts of information and massive amounts of records. And do you feel that influencing you at all? Or do you feel that kind of, and I'm talking about this in a very non-literal way, but do you feel that, like, do you feel that vibe? Do you feel that?
I get overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed. I think it's a good word.
Overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
I do. I mean, obviously, I enjoy the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And I love what you're saying about being able to connect things that wouldn't necessarily be connected at any other time. Time and space. Whoa. I don't know. I guess I'm bringing it back to the library where everything's tangible. I can touch things. And as an artist, that's really important for me. I love books. Even if I don't read them, I love the thing. Mm-hmm. So you were mentioning my phone booth space being like this time to pause. And I think that's really poignant because that's what it's like for me going to the library. I mean, I can sit in my home and go crazy on the internet, and spend an entire day trying to find the things that I want to find. But in the library, it just seems a little bit slower. I can chill in there and take the time to find what I need, and that time is cut out for me, Just seems more special than sitting in my underwear in my living room, like maybe checking Facebook instead of actually what I'm supposed to be doing.
That's a great answer, and I think this will be my last question, but like I was telling you, I was listening to this podcast about death, and immediately where my mind went to was, well, I mean, some people archive their entire life right now. They literally archive their life second to second, and so what does that mean whenever you lose somebody in the future and you basically still have them? You don't have them in the present moment, but you have their entire past. And if you miss them or feel lonely or you just really need to see them, you can, in a way, access them again. But it's not the same. We haven't crossed that boundary, but we're definitely getting close.
Closer and closer and closer. My goodness. I mean, it's sort of scary.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if scary is the right word, but because I can look at it two ways or multiple ways, but the beauty of being able to access someone's voice or, I keep thinking about Facebook, what somebody ate the day they died or something. I don't know. I think that's really intriguing, really interesting. At the same time, I think that there's something really beautiful about having those memories in your head and desperately trying to hold on to them, and being able to access your own mind whenever you want. I know that our minds fail us as well, and memory always changes and things are different, but the act of documenting your entire life and then having that for someone else to access seems foreign to me. I don't know, a little alien. But I don't think it's bad. It's just interesting because it's never going to be that person. And neither is your memory, I suppose. So I don't know the difference yet.
And I think that's a really good point. I mean, I could talk much longer about this stuff, but I think one thing too is materiality. Mm-hmm. It seems to be a big thing, and I think it even gets into, you know, I mean, when I come into this studio, obviously I'm much more intrigued than if I were to go look on your Instagram.
Yeah.
You know, so there's something about being in the I think presence. And if you just want to comment on presence and being actually, I think you use the word being informed, objects informing each other, but being in the presence of a material or a person, like, how do you, what importance do you place on that?
On actually interacting with the thing. I just feel like it's much more rich. It's a much more rich experience because there's so many nuances that, I don't know, technology is a wonderful thing, but I don't think it can capture the subtle feelings that we have that come up when we're face to face with someone or something that evokes such strong emotion. In the information age, we can look at photographs of anything that we want to, but a photograph of something and then the real thing are so very different. Yeah, I just think it's, is that answering your question? I just think it's much more rich.
Definitely.
To interact with the actual thing.
I think that's really good. I think that's a good